There is a word for the experience of growing up in a home where nothing was obviously wrong, and yet something always felt like it was, not something that happened, something that was simply absent, quiet, invisible. And the reason most people who grew up this way have never heard that word is that the word doesn't show up in the dramatic version of the story. It shows up in the adult who can't explain why they're the way they are. This video is for that person, not for the person with a dramatic origin story to point to. For the person who has spent years quietly suspecting that something in their childhood shaped them, and equally quietly suspecting that they don't qualify to say so. What follows are 9 signs, not symptoms, not a diagnosis. 9 specific, quiet patterns that show up in adults who grew up in homes that looked functional from the outside but were missing something essential on the inside. And by the end of this video, that thing that was missing will have a name. The first 3 signs are the ones most likely to pass as personality. You apologize constantly. Not just for things you did, for things you didn't do, for taking up space, for having an opinion, for needing something, for existing at a volume that feels, to you, like too much. Here is what that actually is. It is not a personality trait. It is not anxiety in the general sense. It is a nervous system that learned very early that your presence, your needs, your emotions, your requests put something at risk. The apology is not politeness. It is a preemptive shield, and that makes a very specific kind of sense for a child who learned that needing things created distance. You have difficulty receiving things, compliments that land wrong, help that makes you uncomfortable, kindness that produces a faint but distinct alarm, a background question of, what does this person want from me? Or, simply, this isn't real. It won't last. This is not ingratitude. This is a nervous system that never learned that receiving was safe. In a home where emotional attunement was inconsistent, warmth arrived unpredictably, and sometimes not at all. The child who grew up there learned to treat warmth as weather, unreliable, probably temporary. The adult carries that same calculation into every relationship that tries to get close. Ordinary social interactions leave you exhausted in a way that's hard to explain. Not just introversion, not just a preference for quiet. A specific depletion. As if every conversation requires something from you that other people seem to give without thinking. Because it does. When you grew up in a home where you had to monitor constantly, where the adults were emotionally, what mood was coming through the door, whether the air was safe today, you became fluent in a language that never stops running. Every room you enter, your nervous system is still doing that calculation, still scanning, still ready, still spending energy on a job it was never supposed to hold. That is not a character flaw. It is a lesson that outlived its usefulness. None of those 3 signs are obvious signs of anything. That is exactly the point. They pass as personality, as sensitivity, as just the way you are. The next 3 go deeper. You are always monitoring, not just in social situations. All the time. The part of you that is tracking the other person's mood, their tone of voice, the slight shift in their energy, the 2-second pause before they replied, that part never goes quiet. In relationships, this shows up as the constant low-level question, are we okay? Not because something happened. Just because the monitoring never turns off. This is what researchers studying childhood emotional neglect call the hypervigilant attachment style. A nervous system trained to track the emotional weather of another person as a survival strategy. In childhood, that tracking was functional. It told you what was coming. In adulthood, it tells you the same thing, endlessly, about people who are not your parents. You don't know what you want, not in the small sense, I can't decide what to order, in the deeper sense. When someone asks you what you need, there is a genuine blankness. A pause where an answer should be, not because you haven't thought about it, because the process of forming a preference, of checking in with yourself and receiving a real answer, never quite developed the way it should have. Here is why. A child learns what they want, what they feel, what they need, partly through having those things reflected back. You look excited, you seem sad, what's wrong, what do you need right now? Those reflections are not small. They are the raw material from which a self is assembled. In homes where emotional attunement was absent, those reflections were missing. The child learned to look outward at what was needed from them, rather than inward. The adult still doesn't know how to look inward. not as a choice, as a gap. There is a low-level background alarm that is almost always running. Not panic, not acute anxiety, a hum. A persistent, sourceless sense that something is slightly wrong, that you're forgetting something, that something is about to fall apart, that the current moment of stability is borrowed. This is not pessimism. This is a nervous system that was built in an environment where safety was inconsistent, and that therefore never fully learned what safety feels like from the inside. What calm feels like to someone who grew up in a reliably attuned home is different from what it feels like to someone who grew up in yours. For you, calm might feel like waiting, like a held breath, like the moment before something happens. And that makes a very specific kind of sense. Because at some level, for a long time, it was. The last three signs live at a different depth. They are not behavioral patterns. They are identity-level experiences. The ones that feel most shameful to name. The ones that feel most like proof that something is fundamentally wrong. They are not. Stay with this. You feel like an outsider in rooms where you belong. Not everywhere, not always, but often enough that you've stopped trusting belonging when you feel it. There is a glass wall. You can see the warmth in the room. You can perform participation. But underneath, there is this persistent distance, this sense that everyone else received instructions you didn't get, that they know how to be somewhere in a way that never quite arrived for you. A child who grows up in a home where their emotional experience is not consistently met and reflected learns that their internal world is somehow separate from the external one. The world of connection that other people seem to live in feels like it operates by rules they were never taught, because emotionally, they weren't. You have difficulty believing good things will last. Relationships, jobs, periods of peace. When they arrive, a part of you is already preparing for them to end, not as a strategy, not as pessimism, as something that runs below the level of thought. When you grew up in a home where emotional warmth came and went in ways you couldn't predict, where you never quite knew which version of a parent was going to be available today, your nervous system learned something specific. It learned that closeness is temporary, that good things have expiration dates, and the only intelligent strategy is to stay ready for when they end. You know, rationally, completely, that this is not the same situation. And still, the body keeps running the old calculation. You have the sense of a self that was never fully formed, not a dramatic identity crisis. Quieter than that. A persistent uncertainty about who you actually are, separate from your roles, your habits, your history. A difficulty answering questions like, what do you really want? Or what do you actually believe? Not because you haven't thought about them, but because the foundation those answers should rest on feels somehow incomplete. This is perhaps the deepest sign of all, and it is the one most likely to be misread as a character flaw, as evidence that you are somehow less formed, less whole, less real than other people. It is not. It is the direct evidence of what was missing. The developing self needs a mirror. It needs someone to look at its emotions and reflect them back accurately. You're scared, you're excited, you're angry, and that's okay. Without that mirror, consistently, over years, the self forms. But it forms with gaps, with places it couldn't reach because no one was there to show them where to look. You are not broken. You are the product of an absence that was real, even if it was never allowed. If any of these 9 signs landed and you're sitting with the question, is this actually me or am I reading into it? There's a resource in the description built for exactly that moment. It's a short quiz and guide that helps you get a clear answer in about 10 minutes without needing to have had a dramatic story to take it. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. What all 9 of these signs point toward has a name. It's called childhood emotional neglect. Not abuse, not drama, not a parent who wanted to harm you. The word neglect here doesn't mean cruelty. It means absence. The consistent, chronic absence of emotional attunement, of having your feelings noticed, named, and responded to during the years when your nervous system was learning what the world was. Most people who experience this grew up in homes that functioned. Parents who provided, who showed up, who, in many ways, tried. Childhood emotional neglect is not about what your parents did. It is about what was absent in what they did. And that distinction matters. Not to assign blame, but because understanding the cause is the only thing that stops you from assigning it to your character. This is not about who your parents were as people. This is about what a developing nervous system needs and what yours didn't consistently receive. That is cause and effect. It is not a verdict. The reason the word matters, the reason having a name for this is not a small thing, is that the absence of a name has a cost. When what you're carrying doesn't have a name, you fill the gap with the only explanation available. Something is wrong with me. I am too sensitive, too needy, too much, not enough. This is just who I am. And then you spend years trying to fix a character flaw that was never a character flaw. You try harder, you read more, you go to therapy, and something still doesn't move because the thing you're trying to fix isn't located where you've been looking for it. The name doesn't fix anything on its own, but it does something the explanation can't. It places the origin of what you're carrying back where it actually belongs. Not in your character, in your history. You don't have to do anything with this today. You don't have to call your parents. You don't have to restructure your understanding of your entire childhood. You don't have to be sure. The 9 signs either landed or they didn't. And if they did, even partially, even quietly, that landing is information. It is the beginning of having language for something you have been carrying a long time before anyone gave it a name. If you want to go further, to get a clearer picture of whether childhood emotional neglect is specifically what you've been carrying, the quiz and guide in the description walks you through it in about 10 minutes. It's the natural next step from here. Which of these 9 signs landed hardest for you? And did it surprise you that it was there? There is something that needs to be said about the specific experience of coming to this conversation late. Many of the people watching this video have been living with these signs for decades before anyone gave them a framework to hold them in. Decades of interpreting the monitoring, the exhaustion, the blankness, the glass wall at parties as evidence of a personal deficiency. That is a long time to carry something and believe the weight is your fault. The name doesn't erase that time, it doesn't give it back. But it does something quiet and important. It stops the accumulation. When what you're carrying finally has a name, you stop adding to the pile. You stop generating new evidence for the story that something is wrong with you. Because the story changes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the foundation shifts from I am the problem to there was a problem, and I adapted to it. And those adaptations have followed me here. You don't have to make this into anything right now. You don't have to journal it or apply it or turn it into a plan. Some things need to be felt before they can be worked with. If what you heard today touched something you've been carrying for a long time, if one of those 9 signs felt less like a description of a stranger and more like someone finally reading something back to you that you wrote years ago, that's enough. Let it land. You have been carrying this without a name. Now, at least it has one, and that is not a small thing. It is, actually, where everything that comes next begins.